For today's episode of Guest Practices, I welcome Bob Hayward. Bob is an author of 5 Amazon best-selling books and a popular international speaker. He's had an amazing career, and after 12 years in nursing, he started a window cleaning business and then a nursing agency, all quite different. Of the 7 businesses he started, the largest grew to £12 million in today's terms in under 5 years. He now loves using his experience and the skills developed along the way to make growth happen for others, sometimes as a non-exec director, or a growth consultant, HR consultant, or as a senior executive coach. He knows at the heart of the modern, rapidly transforming workplace, executive leaders need to evolve the culture of the organisation for the modern workplace as a strong foundation to mobilise, persuade, engage, motivate management and teams behind the journey ahead. This is at the heart of Bob's book, Persuade, How to Persuade Anyone About Anything. Take a listen. Hello and welcome to this episode of Guest Practices. I'm delighted to welcome Bob Hayward. Bob, thanks for joining me.
A pleasure, Jeremy. Real pleasure.
Well, it's great to see you again. So can you tell us a little bit more about you, your business experiences, and of course your book, Persuade, How to Persuade Anyone About Anything?
Yeah, I begged the publisher to put another word on that title, which was almost, but they wouldn't allow me. So it's, yes, I wrote that with a really good buddy of mine, Nick Baldock, who sadly is no longer with us. And that was a real piece of work. We poured an awful lot of time and effort and energy into kind of condensing the wisdom of persuasion, which we find as a fascinating topic because it's hugely more challenging than a trade or a negotiation to get someone to give up a point of view and take yours on, because you've got nothing to give them. There's no trade, there's no sale. So persuasion, is almost the ultimate of influence. And that's been influence and leadership and sales has been a big part of what I do for many, many years. So, yeah, I was really honoured to be part of that book and really pleased with its success.
That's great, and of course you've had a wide and varied business career. Maybe you can just give us some highlights, Bob, for people that don't know you.
Well, I was born at a very young age. My first career was in nursing. So I had a really bad motorbike accident and got shipped off to hospital. I wouldn't have willingly gone to hospital. I'm pretty scared of those places. But the motorbike accident made it a given. And that period in hospital really had an impact. I spent probably 6 weeks on skeletal traction with the threat of losing my left foot. Thankfully, I didn't, thanks to the wonders of modern medicine, modern surgery. But the experience of being on that orthopedic ward with the nurses and the doctors and the other mad patients like me was a game changer. So when I came out, I applied to become a nurse and got into Lewisham Nursing School. It was in those days. It joined later with Guy's in London. Qualified as a general nurse, then went into ITU, and then went on into psychiatry. Psychiatry was another kind of revelation to me because you got into human psychology. That was my first kind of real induction into the human mind and how it functions, whether it's well or not well. Because to study psychiatry, you've also got to understand psychology. And I really got wrapped up in that. I got frustrated with progress as a career person because even though I had 2 degrees and plenty of good experience behind me, I couldn't get the promotions I needed. So I jumped ship and became a drug salesman, ethical drugs, of course, for a company called Reckitt and Coleman. And within 2 years, I kind of got itchy feet again and was still wanting to earn more. So I started my first business, which was a window cleaning business, and grew that to about £1 million with lots of product sales and various other things. Along the way, started a recruitment business, which we took to 5.6 million in those days. In today's money, that's about 12 million. then had a big fight with the other three shareholders and owners. So we dissolved that company, and I started again with another organisation. Through a convoluted route, I ended up working for the Dale Carnegie Training Organisation, probably one of the largest training organisations in the world. And they taught me to do much of the kind of a technical approach as a trainer and a consultant that I use now. And in the early 90s, I set up on my own and been more effective, never looked back since. Potted history.
I know. Well, I'm glad you clarified that point about the drug sales bit that was your springboard for success.
Yes.
And then it's
Breaking Bad, by the way. This is not a Breaking Bad story.
No, no. But then the window cleaning into recruiting, that broad experience has been absolutely key. And of course, when we met, we were able to learn in our business quite a lot from you and what you were doing at the time as well. And you've always been passionate about leadership in the business, about the power of sales in the business, about the customer and so on. And I'm wondering now, Bob, particularly before we get into the real core of the persuasiveness in the book, something that you pick up on, as we emerge from the pandemic, why do we need to evolve our culture of businesses everywhere? And not just the businesses, but teams everywhere behind a growth mindset, do you think?
Well, culture has been an influencing culture through influencing leaders, been a big part of what I've been about, over the years, whether that company is big or small. The culture of a business kills everything else or builds everything else. I mean, it doesn't matter whether you've got a great strategy or a great set of goals or a brand new initiative. If the culture's not behind it, then it's not going to last 5 minutes. Keeping culture healthy then and fit for purpose is massively important. And it's a bit like brushing your teeth. I mean, if you never brushed your teeth, it wouldn't take long before things started to smell bad for you and for others. And it wouldn't take long for it to become very painful and probably very expensive. And that's what happens in organizations big and small when the leadership don't pay attention to developing the culture. Given the choice of supporting individuals and teams and having an organizational culture of a fixed mindset as an alternative to a growth mindset means that everyone's focused on current performance, current processes, current products, current skills. So typically we're in maintenance mode. Now, it's very hard to maintain anything in nature. I mean, a tomato is either getting ripe or going rotten, even when you put it in the fridge. So it doesn't make sense, really, to have a fixed mindset. And certainly exiting any major crisis, and I think we can count the pandemic as a major crisis, you'd be forgiven for having a downbeat mindset. Now, if you've got a downbeat culture, everyone knows, or at least the critical mass know, that the end is nigh, then that's not going to help us get out of this situation. Now, a growth mindset means being most active on ways to improve. As an individual in the company, I would want to improve myself. As a supervisor or as a leader or a team player, I would want to improve my team, my processes, my products, my results. So it's vitally important because more businesses and teams fail on the way out of a crisis, primarily because they've either run out of cash or they've run out of energy or they've run out of ideas, because we've used whatever reserves we've had during the crisis and not had a growth mindset to replenish that battery, to replenish the enthusiasm, to replenish the hope. It's much better to protect the core of a current business if you also innovating on the edges and improving the core as well as the new aspects of the business. So for me, culture is that internal change factor that has a huge impact on performance, has a huge impact on improvement, possibly the biggest single aspect. And if leaders want to shift the culture, if they want to shift performance, then strengthening the mindset that underpins the growth culture is strategically important, because performance and results are highly likely to go up, external factors being fairly stable.
You know what I love there, Bob, is that culture is at the heart of leadership's new hygiene regimen post-pandemic. Absolutely at the heart of a growth mindset, because, of course, it is about growing ourselves, growing our people, growing as leaders to grow the business, but also to be more creative and to innovate. So the obvious question coming from that then are, what are the, again, emerging behaviors and skills that the senior executive leaders that we might be talking about in this need to model that'll more positively influence managers and teams to engage in that more growth-centered journey?
Yeah, I mean, leaders probably have the huge impact on culture as culture has on performance. So if you want to shift culture, you have got to look at the leadership behaviors that are going to provide that major pull. And of course, there's loads of research been done over decades, recent times and past times, on leadership behaviors and its impact on people. You know, I'm a big fan of Gilles Roquefort's work in Canada, and he cites 4 clusters of behavior that really underpin the impacts that leaders can have on the development of individuals and the development of teams. He talks about behaviors that support a leader's credibility, for instance, behaviors that demonstrate their desire to lead and coach and mentor. He talks about their skills, of course, and also how they make use of their capacity with things like time, the ultimate limiting resource of everybody. So making time to follow up on people's development becomes an essential leadership behavior. Setting goals well, organizing plans well, delegating well, yeah, they're kind of obvious, fundamental. It's very dangerous to go looking for that new exciting white rabbit, because 1 + 1 still equals 2. You know, that stuff hasn't changed. And if we forget some of these fundamental human relationship skills, then we're going to struggle. Liking to consult is a very powerful behavior pattern prior to decision making. Now, notice that Gilles talked about liking to consult. You know, how do your people know by your behavior that you like to consult? Not just that you do consult prior to decision making. Actually, you enjoy the experience. You look forward to it. You want that radical feedback, as Kim Scott talked about in Radical Candor. Of course, giving recognition is hugely important. We know that, catching people doing things right. But what about holding people to account, having put things in place? Yes, Gilles' work really does show that velvet glove in a still fist or a still hand really does matter. I'm surprised just how long something like servant leadership as a model was taken to really get to the fore. It seems to have been around for generations and never really come to the fore as it is doing in these recent times. But without the steel of holding people to account, then providing the recognition actually, from Gilles' work, just doesn't pay. Yes, we've got to be a good listener. And listening is probably the toughest skill in the kit bag. You know, whether you're a salesperson or a leader, we might think that asking questions is the most powerful skill. Try that without listening. Listening is fundamental to being a good teacher, to being a good mentor, to being a good coach. So I'm fascinated by this opportunity we have to be a servant leader that both models and influences, that persuades, that nudges, that sets boundaries, that fine-tunes the tracks that other people run on. And actually, I think General Bill Slim of the 14th British Army said it the best. You know, that he's the guy that turned absolute defeat in Burma to victory against the Japanese. Well, him and the 14th Army, of course. But before he took over, they were just in disarray. It was going to be the worst defeat of any British Army history. And he describes leadership as a projection of personality. And that's a combination of persuasion, compulsion, and example that makes people do what you want them to do. And for me, his book, Death to Victory, really is mandatory reading. It's mandatory reading for leadership in the armed forces these days, and I think it should be mandatory reading elsewhere.
Well, there's a few nuggets that came out of that, and in the time where speed is ever accelerating and speed becomes competitive advantage over size, let's say, for example, how we used to measure success in the I was going to say old days, but just 10 years ago of where it was. Time is the commodity that you so rightly say is so important here to get hold of and go back to those principles of what does it's almost not time management or time or priority management. It's what do you deprioritize so that you can do some of this more human-centered element that you're talking about, which is so important, that is again emerging from a leadership perspective. The human-centered skills are what we're seeing as coming out as the most powerful and the most important for the decade ahead, according to employees and leaders themselves. So I was interested in something that you talked about at the end there, because you started then to go into the persuasion element, and there is a fine line in what you said at the end there between persuasion and compulsion, and the level of influence that is on the people that you're wanting to bring with you and even empower through that journey as well. So what does that tightrope look like, and where does the real power lie when you get influence and persuasion right?
Yeah, it's a fascinating one. I mean, you take the example of General Bill. Yeah, there was the kind of classic case study in his book is where you're trying to get the army in Burma to take their tablet, which is going to stop the malaria and the other diseases that are rife at the time. And whatever they did from a persuasion point of view, in terms of the marketing and the posters and the senior managers and the sergeants telling the soldiers to take their stupid tablet every day, it just wasn't working. And they had huge levels of sickness. So there are times when we have to be quite tough with people and talk about the consequences of not behaving in the way that is required to behave. And in Bill's case, he realized there were a number of the senior managers, if you will, in his organization that weren't walking the talk. Their talk talked, but we know that walk talks louder than talk talks. And he found these senior managers who were themselves not taking the tablets. Now, the reason people weren't taking the tablets because there was a myth going around that they caused infertility. Now, why the soldiers and the captains and the commanders were worried about their fertility ability when they're in the middle of a battle in Burma, but male psyche is a wonderful thing if we could understand it. They were refusing to take their medication because of that. So Bill took an unprecedented step and fired every one of the senior majors and generals and people in his command who were not taking their tablets on a regular basis. And he basically said to the rest, that's what's going to happen to you. I'm sending you home. I don't care how short-handed I get. Unless you walk the talk, you're going. And he made it absolutely and abundantly clear. Now, there were few things that he put that red line down on. There were just a few behaviors which he drew the red line and said, no, this is compulsion. The rest of the time he spent working on persuasion. And I draw a parallel with one of my clients in recent times as they went through the early stages of the lockdown. They are absolutely committed to a set of values, 5 values which underpin absolutely everything they do. And one of those values is support. So they they work very hard to support, not blame. If anything goes wrong, they work hard to support, not blame. And when the pandemic hit, they saw an immediate 25% dip in sales. And this is a big company. It's a multi-million-pound company, and that hurt. And they said to themselves, a senior team said, no furlough. We're going to support our people. There are some people not going to be busy, so we're going to set up some community projects and we're going to help other people. We're going to keep everybody busy. If they can't be busy in the company, they're going to be busy helping the local community or the community where they live. And we will, at the same time, ask for voluntary and temporary pay cuts. The directors agreed they would take 100% pay cut. So the directors gave up their entire salary for the first 6 months of the original lockdown. And the staff were told that. But it's your choice. We are determined to support you, but in return, we need your support. The staff volunteered an average of 18.1% of a pay reduction. Now, during that period, there were people who didn't play the game and didn't live by the values, and they were let go. The vast majority of people enjoyed a very busy period helping lots of others. They stick to their guns with their values. And one of the ways you get recruited to organizations, that organization is based on values and whether you match their values. And one of the easiest ways to be shown the door is to disrespect those values. Provided you don't disrespect those values, they will do absolutely amazing things to try and support you, like they did during that pandemic. Now, having fed the growth mindset, having supported the staff through all of that, they're seeing 6 times this year, 6 times the results, 6 times the output they had in previous years. So 2020, we're going to beat by a factor of 6. They won the head and the heart of people and done an amazing job of that. And that still includes you have to stick to certain values. If you don't stick to those values, you're out. If you stick to the values, you're in the family, and we will bend over backwards to support you. And I think that's the fascinating balance between compulsion and persuasion. There has to be some tracks to run on. There has to be some walls in a conversation. There has to be a framework. We feel much safer in that framework. We feel motivated in that framework. It's not motivational to have free rein and just work on influence and persuasion. Actually, we expect our leaders to hold us to account. We don't respect leaders that don't hold us to account. So the two do go hand in hand.
Yeah, that's a fascinating story, and quantifiable benefits coming out of it as well. And compulsion, therefore, while you were talking about that to me, a compulsion really is about what are the rules of the road that we're setting. So these clear tracks, as you call it, and then the vehicle of persuasion to influence people to come along for that journey, probably fast tracked when you get that right as well, behind a set of values, is so key. And it also got me thinking about soft influence, because while you're focused internally and in that company's example, externally in the communities that they serve, you've also got this soft influence on potential employees, independent workers that are looking in. They're looking at how you treat your employees. They're looking at the levels that they're managed or supervised at, and the kind of opportunities and challenges that they're managing going in, and what they're doing socially as well. This is becoming much more top of mind for employees, who these days are the ones asking the tough questions in interviews, not necessarily the human resources. Yeah. So that's a great example of some of the benefits that come out from doing this. And I'm sure it also impacts measures like employee satisfaction and even customer satisfaction and more. Have you done any further studies on actually what other quantifiable benefits can come out of that?
Yeah, I mean, when you work closely with an organization, it's quite fascinating just how much, from a consulting point of view, we can do with organizations where they're not always that keen to pay the extra bit for the return on investment study that could go alongside it. A few do. And when you get that opportunity, then you're right. You do, there is a tremendous connection, almost a direct link, like there is with the Net Promoter Score and customer satisfaction. You get a direct link to the growth of the organization through the Net Promoter Score. When you have that kind of employee engagement going on, then you see a direct connection with performance improvement in the team. Now, if you look at presenteeism versus absenteeism, you also get the other dimension of it. So while figures will show from research you probably get something more like 200% output from winning people's head and heart as opposed to their hands and feet, the alternative is having people who just sit in there. And presenteeism is a much bigger cost on a business than absenteeism. Now, there's plenty of figures on absenteeism, but it's much harder to measure presenteeism when people just literally are showing up and not playing the game. So in the client I spoke of earlier on, for instance, there's just been a series of mental health training. So we've trained another batch of mental health first aiders. They have a care team. So the care team is big enough that each care team captain only has to have contact with 6 or 7 people over the month. And they intentionally arrange, organize, provoke non-work related conversations that just engage the hearts and minds of those people. Now, you do that on one level to really engender not just the values, but the fact that this employer really does care. They're wanting their staff to look after each other. And then you measure the results of that. And what we've seen is, people are working incredibly hard. So we've done the survey on just how much time and effort and energy is getting put into working hours. And that's high. We can see that although people are stretching themselves, that very few people are overstretching because there's the care and watchfulness from the core of the business as well. So we've got maybe only 5% of staff who are working too hard and becoming less productive as a result. So I think, there is enough evidence when you actually sit down and look at it. It's not just about employee satisfaction. What you've got to look for is the genuine forms of employee engagement. And you can get that with measuring some of the discretionary efforts. Like, how do you get someone who's already busy to become a care team captain and go looking after another bunch of people who aren't in their direct team? That's discretionary effort. In that company, you've got a whole group of care team captains who willingly put themselves forward to that, then gone on and become mental health first aid trainers. And we've seen the direct results of that, both in hours of work done and in the fact that we're producing a much higher productivity figure per employee.
A couple of things I really love there, Bob, and the terminology of that discretionary effort, that at a time where we're busy anyway, in partly looking after the business, looking after our customers, learning to remote work, thinking about a hybrid business model, you name it, all of the transformation that's going on. When you have the care and watchfulness, as you so rightly said, from a senior leadership and organizational culture perspective in place, you mobilize, you engage, and you motivate at far greater and deeper levels. So you have the qualitative as much as the quantitative benefits that come from it. So the obvious question for me, Bob, is, if you know the answer to this one, is what's the cost of getting that wrong? And do you have any examples?
The unfortunate classic case study on this for me is sadly British Rail. Swindon is a town I've lived in and near for quite a few years of my life. We have something called the Railway Museum. And the Railway Museum used to be the factory where the bulk of the railways were made. And we had something like 5,000 people working in that factory in its heyday. Swindon built the railways not just for the UK, but for many parts of the world. But really, just how productive was the national workforce? It's scary. If you look at the numbers, it's not good in terms of overall costs and productivity. If you compare their performance and the quality of what was being produced in the end before its demise, the quality of the service provided to the public, you've got to question it. Now, I know from first-hand experience living in and around Swindon for the length of time that I have, that there are many people who used to work in that factory who, long time retired now, still work as volunteers on a railway line, a charity railway line, where they've really built trains and carriages and provide amazing services. Now, if you look up and down this country, the UK I'm talking about, I don't know if it exists in other countries, I haven't sorted out, but we have a network of railways running on volunteers in different parts. They don't connect to the national network anymore, but they're brilliant. The engineering's amazing. The service is amazing. People willingly go and pay over the odds to sit on a steam train and drive a couple of miles up a track and back again. I mean, what's all that about? You're not going anywhere. But what you've got there is someone applying their passion as opposed to seeing an organization go down and down and down in its reputation because people are showing up and just not getting on with it. Now, there are many examples there where leadership has lost the investment of bankers, James Ratner, for an example of that. And there are other examples of where people have lost the workforce. If we talk about football, and I know to avoid the word Spurs very carefully with yourself, but if a manager loses the dressing room, the team's results are going to go out the window. Yeah, we don't have to look far for the cost of poor leadership. We can see it. If you look at the staff churn in many organizations, I would ask the question, what's happening at the leadership level? One of my clients is just losing the second very senior manager in their organization in the last 6 months. And I'm asking the question to the chief exec, sorry, who's the director in charge? What's going on? Why have we lost two high quality people within a 6-month window? So whether you look at staff turnover, whether you look at team performance, whether you look at the brand performance and its longevity, it's very easy to see the cost of presenteeism.
It's interesting that where this all points to again is that if the culture of the leadership isn't in place for the modern workplace or the evolving workplace, whenever it was in the past or even now as we emerge from COVID, how on earth can we expect the organizational culture to shift also? And so leaders really have to step up. And those leaders that are, as you so rightly said before, walking the walk, are getting it right. They're getting that balance between the rules, the compulsion, as you talked about before, between the persuasion and influence to bring people along with them. There's some great examples of organizations doing that this year. But rather than get some tips from these organizations now, I'd like to go back to your book, Persuade. And what are the kind of things that you recommend to leaders within this book that powers up their own journey to accelerate their own performance and evolve the company culture and bring people along with them? What can they do?
Well, the book Persuade is built on a model of the word. So each of the letters of the word means something. So P is planning, E is expanding your understanding, rationalization, summarize, understand the person, address issues, deliver benefits, evaluate outcomes. There's a model there. It's a framework. So it can support anybody, almost like a workbook, going through a particular difficult act of persuasion. Yeah, if I were going to try and summarize it down to 3 key things, whether you're trying to persuade one person or a whole organization, it starts with understanding that in persuasion, you're asking someone to give up something, their point of view. It's not a sale, it's not a trade. You're asking them to move from A to B. And that is going to be painful because it involves giving up something, probably something quite precious to them. You can't meet in the middle. You can't be half pregnant. They've got to come all the way across, and they have to do so willingly. Because if they don't do it willingly, they haven't come on the journey. If the critical mass of an organization don't buy into that vision wholeheartedly, whatever that change initiative is, it ain't going to happen. The culture's going to maintain the status quo. So we have to recognize that that is an amazing transition, a change curve in somebody's mind. Then we have to recognize that probably as the leaders, we're already at B. I mean, if the bulk of the staff or the person we're trying to persuade is at A, we're at B, we're there already. And it's highly likely we've forgotten what that painful journey was like for us when we went from A to B. If we can recognize that, then you've got an opportunity to expand your own understanding of both the start point and the finish point and the journey in between. Now, if we can break that down in our own minds through deep understanding, we can come up with, if you like, the building blocks and the questions that got us from A to B ourselves. And we can put them in a Socratic process or a Socratic style of conversation where we can engage the other person's brain through questions. Because if you tell them, they ain't going to get it. You know, persuasion is never about telling. Persuasion is about unlocking the other person's mind with a series of questions that are built on the right kind of building blocks, the right kind of frame of reference to guide people in the right direction. Those questions form the walls of a room in which you hold that person's mind. Now, if the walls are too close to each other, then you're lecturing by question and it doesn't work. If the walls are too far apart, then they could end up anywhere. Having left A, they might not end up at B. So getting that right is a real piece of work. That's an art, and we need to work on that. So that's tip number 1. We really need to understand that journey from A to B in all its intricacies. Tip 2, I would say, we need to work on understanding the other person. Particularly when you're working to influence or persuade one person, you can tailor your approach to specifically that person. Remember that treating people the way you want to be treated doesn't work, because the vast majority of people, if not everybody else, is not like you. What we have to learn to do is treat people the way they wish to be treated in order to give ourselves a fighting chance. So even if you're addressing 1,000 people that work in your company, we have to think hard about how we can make sure not only is it in their self-interests, this message, these questions, but also we're putting it across in the right kind of style that's going to land with those types of people. And tip 3 is employ 3 Greeks: ethos, pathos, and logos. Now, there's much better orators than me that have come up with that amazing model. But if we can build on our personal credibility and the other person's credibility, ethos, if we can build deep empathetic understanding between us and the audience that we're addressing, pathos, we have a big chance. And of course, along the way, we need a logical, evidence-based, rational, pragmatic argument to bottom it out. We need the logos. So there's the 3 tips. Expand your understanding, understand the other person deeply, and employ 3 Greeks.
Yeah, that journey from A to B, what I loved what you said there about that you've already gone through that in your mind and even physically in some ways when you're driving that. But it's so easy to forget, isn't it, that the journey is just starting for some. So understanding those individuals, whether it's individuals, a group, or the whole organization, and having things in place that help them. And it goes back to what we were talking about before, that human center again, getting connected to the human center, which is very much aligned to the ethos, pathos, and logos as well. That's at the heart. We know of great leaders, of great storytellers, of great orators, those people that can mobilize, engage, motivate others and bring them along with you. That's the real magic, isn't it? And that's a very human trait, when you've got those other things supporting it. So look, Bob, thank you so much for taking us through this. So just before we go, how can people get hold of you or connect with you, and how can they get hold of your book, Persuade?
The easiest place to find book Persuade is on Amazon. I'm sure there are other quality bookshops available, but if you type Persuade and Bob Hayward in, then Persuade anyone about anything will come up. To connect with me, I'm on LinkedIn as Bob Hayward. So LinkedIn, IN/Bob Hayward, no dots, no gaps. That will find me. Jeremy, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you very much for the invite. I've thoroughly enjoyed our discussions today.
Well, I've enjoyed it too, Bob. Thanks so much for joining me. Goodbye.
Bye now.
Thank you for joining our Guest Practices videocast. Please do subscribe to our YouTube channel through the link below, or check out our website to access more in our current series of expert interviews.